Good morning, students. Today we are going to study about another type of shares, that is preference share. In the last class, I have told you all what is a share. What is a share? A share is the share in the share capital of the company. So let's begin with the preference shares. What do you mean by preference shares? Preference shares, by the name itself, have certain preferences or privileges over. Now, preference shares are the shares which carry certain privileges or preferential rights. And preferential rights are regarding your dividend and the return of capital. Okay. So, these are those types of shares on which a fixed rate of dividend is paid. If it is 10%, then it is fixed. They'll get 10% fixed rate of dividend. But on the other hand, in the equity share, the rate of dividend was not fixed. Okay. Now, dividend on preference share is paid in priority to equity share dividend. That is, which you can say it means that preference shares are paid dividend before the dividend is paid on the equity share. Equity share को dividend देने से पहले preference shares को dividend दिया जाता है. Second, preference shares capital is paid back. Okay, it can be paid back and in the event of winding up of the company, जब कंपनी क्लोज हो रहा होता है, then equity shares के पहले आपके preference shares को claim दिया जाता है. That is return of capital. Okay. Now, it is also called as hybrid security. Why it is called as hybrid security? Because it has the features of both the equity share as well as the debenture. Like equity share, it will get dividend only when the firm is having profit. Okay. If the firm is incurring losses, then they won't pay the preference shares also. And the feature of debenture is that they get fixed percentage of dividend. And so here in the same case, preference shares also get the fixed rate of dividend. That is why it is called as hybrid security. Sometimes it is asked in the question like, what is a hybrid security? Preference shares are called as the hybrid security as it has the features of both the equity shares as well as the you can say debenture. Let's study about some of the features of preference shares. Number one, a fixed rate of dividend is paid on preference shares, as I have told you all earlier. Second, the dividend is paid before the equity shareholders. Third, you can say the preference share capital is returned in priority to the equity share capital. When the company is in the position of winding up, then the preference share capital is paid first, then the equity share capital. Next is your preference shareholders do not have voting rights. They don't get voting rights. And the company can issue different kinds of preference shares, like you can say redeemable, non-redeemable, cumulative, non-cumulative, etc. So we'll study in details about that. Let's study the types of preference share. The first type of preference share is your cumulative preference shares and non-cumulative preference shares. So, what do you mean by cumulative? By the term cumulative, cumulative means which keeps on continuing. So, what is cumulative preference shares? These preference shares have a right to get dividend out of the profit, and in the case if the firm is not having sufficient profit, then the dividend will be carried forward and they will be paid next year from the profit. Suppose एक firm है, I am a preference shareholder of a particular firm XYZ. ओके अगर उस फर्म को 2020 में आपका उतना प्रॉफिट नहीं हुआ है एंड दे आर नॉट एबल टू पे मी डिविडेंड, okay, and I am having a, you can say, cumulative preference share. So what they will do, इस साल का dividend they will give me along with the next year का dividend. That is your cumulative preference shares. The dividend keeps on accumulating and carried forward. On the other hand, non-cumulative preference shares, it is not carried forward. इस साल देंगे वो अगले साल कंटिन्यू नहीं होता है. Second is your redeemable preference shares and irredeemable preference shares. What do you mean by redeemable? Redeemable means paid back. Okay. So, redeemable preference shares, after a fixed period of time, the preference share capital can be returned to the shareholders, and irredeemable means it cannot be returned back to the shareholders. Third is convertible and non-convertible. Convertible means after a fixed period of time, your preference shareholders can be given the option to get it converted into equity shareholders. That is your convertible preference shares. And non-convertible preference share is that cannot be converted into equity share capital. Next is your, you can say, participating and non-participating. Participating preference shares are those preference shares on which the investors have the right to participate in the surplus of the profits left after paying all the dividend. Like कंपनी ने सारा डिविडेंड दे दिया है, अभी भी उनके पास कुछ प्रॉफिट बचा है, तो participating preference shareholders will get the surplus from that also, dividend from that surplus also. That is your participating preference shares. और non-participating में क्या होता है, only the fixed percentage of dividend is paid, उनका कोई भी right नहीं होता है from the surplus of the company. These are the, you can say, 4 categories of preference shares: cumulative, non-cumulative, participating, non-participating, convertible, non-convertible, redeemable and irredeemable. So let's study about the advantages of the preference shares. What are the benefits of the preference shares? So first we will study from the company's point of view. Number 1 is appeal to cautious investors. What do you mean by appeal to cautious investors? Basically, those investors invest in preference shares who want more security and stability. Like they want security कि हाँ मेरे को fixed percentage of dividend मिलना है, and they want a regular dividend in their earnings as compared to equity share. Equity share में आपका regular नहीं होता है, but if suppose a person is having cumulative preference share, तो वो तो उनको मिलेगा ही. They are secure about that. So that is why it is called as appeal to cautious investors. Second is your no interference in management. What do you mean by no interference in management? As you know, preference shareholders are not given rights, voting rights in the management of the company. That is why they don't have interference in the management's decision and all. Third is no charge on assets. A company is not required to create a charge on the assets of the company. Therefore, the assets of the company can be used for raising loans in future. कोई एसेट नहीं रखना है उनको प्रेफरेंस शेयर इशू करने के लिए, तो उनका जो एसेट है वो बाद में वो यूज कर सकते हैं फॉर रेजिंग सर्टेन लोन्स इन द फ्यूचर. Fourth is your trading on equity. We have studied what is trading on equity, the proper proportionate between your own funds and your debt. So the rate of dividend payable on preference share is fixed. When the earnings of the company are good, a higher rate of, you can say, dividend can be paid on the equity shares. So that is why it is called as trading on equity. Fifth is no burden on profit. Now, there is no obligation or a company is not bound to pay dividend in case of insufficient profit or when there are losses in the company. That is why it is called as no burden on profit. If the firm is getting profit, then only they have to pay the preference shareholders also, except in certain cases. Okay, so that is why there is no burden on the profits. Next is 6 is flexibility. A company can maintain flexibility in its capital structure by issuing redeemable preference shares. क्या किया? Redeemable preference share issue किया है. अब उनको उतना पैसा नहीं चाहिए, उतना capital नहीं चाहिए. What they will do? They will return back their preference shareholders their money. That will be your redeemable. They will be paid back. और आपका burden खत्म हो जाएगा. That is why it is flexible. Next, the advantages from the shareholders' point of view. Number 1 is stable and regular dividend. We have studied there is a higher possibility of getting stable and regular dividend because you know that preference dividend is paid before the equity share dividend. तो उनको पता है कि हाँ equity shareholders से पहले हमें मिलेगा, तो हमें stability है, हमें हमारे पास regular dividend आने की chances है. Second is less risk. Preference shares are less risky. You know why? Because as compared to equity shares, there is no fluctuation in the prices of the shares and there is a better security to their investment as compared to equity share. That is why it is less risky. And you know that during the winding up of the company also, their capital is paid before the equity share. That is why they have certain, you can say, less amount of risk as compared to equity shareholders. Third is your redemption. Most of the preference shares are redeemable after a fixed period of time. Therefore, the investor can get back their investment from the company. As the company is issuing like your redeemable preference shares, or any kind of preference share is redeemable after your 20 years. So, that is why they can easily pay back the money and reduce their burden. Fourth is your cumulative dividend. In case of cumulative dividend shares, the dividend is carried forward and the arrears are paid out of the future profit. अभी burden नहीं है, अब क्या करोगे, next year profit होगा तो next year के profit में से देना पड़ेगा, but अभी आपको वो burden ये करने की टेंशन नहीं है. और इन्वेस्टर्स को भी पता है कि इन्वेस्टर्स नो कि यस आज मेरे को नहीं मिला है, कल मेरे को वो प्रॉफिट मिल जाएगा. Next is your disadvantages of preference shares. So let's study the disadvantages from the company's point of view. The first one is costly source. The dividend on preference shares cannot be treated as the business expenses. उसको business expense में नहीं देखा जाता है, and that is why company has to pay higher rate of taxes in the dividend of the preference shares. Second is your permanent burden. There is a permanent burden in the case of cumulative preference share because company को pay करना ही पड़ेगा. आज नहीं करे but कल उनको pay करना ही पड़ेगा. That is why it is called as permanent burden. Third is your legal formalities. Legal formalities means a company has to follow a number of legal formalities when company is, you can say, when the preference shares are redeemed. That is why they have a huge number of list of the legal formalities. Fourth is low appeal. Why it has low appeal? Because a cautious investor prefers debentures than preference shares because they know company को profit हो loss हो उससे मतलब नहीं है, but in the debenture they'll get a fixed rate of dividend. That is why the people, you can say people, the cautious investors prefer more to invest on debentures rather than on preference shares. Next is the demerits, you can say disadvantages from the viewpoint of the shareholder. The first one is, you can say no voting right. They don't have voting rights, okay, and they cannot participate in the meetings of the shareholders or give their decision. That is the first demerit. Second is no capital appreciation. Appreciation means increase. Their capital is not increasing. So preference shares are not listed in the stock exchange. Therefore, there is no possibility of increase of capital appreciation of preference shares because they are not listed in the stock market. If it is not listed in the stock market, then their capital won't be appreciated during the boom period as it happens in the equity shares. Third is no guarantee of dividend. How they have no guarantee of dividend? Because they are also paid only out of profit. If the company is incurring losses, no dividend will be paid even to preference shares. Fourth is fear of being shown the door. You know, in the case of redeemable preference shares or any kind of preference shares, as it is redeemable after 20 years, a company has the option to pay back the preference share capital in case it has surplus fund. If the company has surplus fund and they don't need any kind of, you can say, capital, they will bid goodbye to the preference shareholders and they will reduce their burden. That is why they can be shown their doors anytime. These are all about preference shares. Please study any 5 differences between equity shares and the preference shares, and you have to write down the differences in complete sentences along with basis of distinction. Okay, thank you.